Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the dangerous developments coming from the following Israeli breaches, repeated Israeli breaches on Lebanon after the ceasefire took place. And now we are at a stage where Hezbollah decided they are no longer going to contain it, and therefore they started their first response after the Israeli breaches. We're also going to be talking about the updates from the ground in Gaza. We've heard reports about the Palestinian resistance launching missiles on Israel from Gaza again. And now we have more developments coming in from Syria. We have the Iranian foreign minister. He visited Turkey. All of a sudden, we're listening to a change in tone from the Turkish officials, alongside threats coming from Israel against Syria. But we're going to start off with the main thing. Hezbollah, they told Israel, and if you return, we will return. And today they have returned. We've had a week of repeated breaches coming from Israel against Lebanon, day after day, immediately after the implementation of the ceasefire. Why is that? Do you know why that is? It's because Israel had a side agreement with the United States, like someone's getting married and publicly having a side, woman. That's what Israel did with the United States. And what did that side agreement allow Israel to do? Well, it allowed them to, hit Hezbollah if they see a threat and attack them, basically, without clear definitions as to the threats, the level of threats. One of these clauses in their side agreement with the United States says that the Israeli side should speak to the committee in charge of implementation when it comes to the ceasefire, and only if they are unable to act, then Israel would act. But then it also allows Israel to act if it sees there's any threat to launch something from Lebanon, or if there's a threat that, what Israel sees a threat. Israel sees ants as a threat. Israel sees air as a threat. Everything's a threat to them. So that allowed them, that enabled them to do that. Yet, despite that, Amos Hochstein is complaining. Hochstein is complaining. He said, Israel, you're breaching the ceasefire. Well, what do you expect? Well, you allowed them to, publicly. And then the French also criticized Israel. However, there's so much that the other side can handle. And we've had 3 martyrs in Lebanon the past week, following the reckless mass terror attacks of Israel and breaches in Lebanon. Well, not mass, but they had attacks in Lebanon that killed people. And they had attacks in breaches in Beirut. Those breaches were in the form of invading the Lebanese airspace. And they had attacks in the south. So now Hezbollah said, that's it. It's not like it's a one-side agreement here. If you want to violate, we will violate. And they had this report today. The Israeli enemy has repeatedly violated the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon without any respect for all the American mediation attempts and the efforts made to get the enemy out of its predicament after the failure of its ground aggression on southern Lebanon, with the painful blows it received from the Islamic resistance along the border area and the Zionist settlements in northern occupied Palestine, reaching deep into the usurping entity and to Haifa and beyond, even to Tel Aviv. And they have had a missile on a location that Israel calls Har Dov, with several missiles. And they landed. And now we have talks in Israel about a response. As a matter of fact, we are having more talks that the responses will be increasing. And the Lebanese parliament speaker, Nabih Berri, who led the mediation, he also confirmed that the aggressive actions carried out by the Israeli occupation forces in terms of bulldozing homes in the Lebanese villages bordering occupied Palestine, in addition to continued air raids and the implementation of raids that target more than once the depths of Lebanese areas, during which martyrs and wounded fell, all these actions represent a flagrant violation of the terms of the ceasefire. Clearly, the ceasefire was on the 27th. Today is the 2nd of December. The agreement was signed on the 27th of November. Every single day, Israel had breaches. They had breaches against Lebanon, and today Hezbollah started to respond. Is this the end of the ceasefire? It could be, because the behavior of Israel from the beginning showed that it's not really interested in a ceasefire, just a bit of a one-sided ceasefire, so that they can continue their aggression against Lebanon, rearm, regroup, and get more weapons, and do whatever they want without any repercussions. And as a matter of fact, we've had reports that Israel started to, because this is a developing thing, by the way, they actually started to conduct attacks against Lebanon following the response coming from Hezbollah against these Israeli breaches. So we had a report in one of the Israeli newspapers saying, in response to the shooting on Mount Dov, the IDF bombed 20 Hezbollah launchers. There you go, 20, and that's just literally now, 15 minutes ago. This was just updated ever since I copied the link, by the way. So meaning now you have 20 Israeli attacks on Lebanon confirmed by Israel after Hezbollah responded to the continued Israeli breaches. And the IDF continues to attack in South Lebanon. So it doesn't look like we have any sort of ceasefire anymore. This is clearly the beginning of the end when it comes to this very fragile ceasefire. And this end is coming primarily because of the continued aggressions and continued violations of the terrorist state against Lebanon after they actually signed a ceasefire agreement. So we are expected to see more escalation. I would not be surprised if within the next hours we will have more attacks coming back and forth, even from Hezbollah. And I don't think it will be too long before Hezbollah again start targeting the areas that they were already targeting towards the end of the ceasefire, because their targeting of Har Dov in the beginning, they said that they targeted this area near the borders. That was just a sign. So this is what Hezbollah usually do. They'll say, okay, we'll give you a sign that we won't just sit there, right, and not do anything. We will respond to your aggression, to see what type of response they will get from Israel. This is the response that they got from Israel. What? 20 attacks against what Israel claims to be missile launchers. And Israel can claim anything to be a missile launcher. Anything to Israel can be interpreted as a missile launcher or as a, whatever it is. You know them. They're hyper-pathological liars who lie more than they breathe. So we're looking at the end of the ceasefire, and it won't be too long, in my opinion, up until everything goes full-blown again when it comes to Hezbollah in Israel. And that is primarily due to the genostate breaching these agreements and the backing of the United States administration that is fueling this conflict and fueling other conflicts across the world. That's the first thing, and I will continue to inform you with anything that comes in on that front. Then, Gaza. Gaza is targeting Israel. Here they're saying they're issuing a warning to some of the residents in Gaza, as if that makes any difference. You know, they kill people in tents. What do you mean warning them? As if they care. But they're saying Israel is confirming that a missile was launched from Khan Yunis. A missile being launched from Gaza, guys, is not a missile being launched from Lebanon. A missile being launched from Gaza against Israel is something extremely significant, because you're talking about massive Israeli presence, massive destruction, bulldozing, bombing everything. Yet the Palestinian resistance is still able not only to conduct resistance actions against the genocide forces inside of the Gazan territories, where Israel is committing a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing and barbarism, but they're also able to hit inside of Israel. Now, mind you, the attacks of the Palestinian resistance when it comes to missiles is not very significant when it comes to Israel, but it does bother Israel. It bothers Israel because they still have that capability, and it bothers Israel because it still gives that sense of lack of safety for the settlers in the area surrounding Gaza. And Israel is trying very hard to prepare everything so that people can go back, and not only go back, well, they're planning, they're inviting settlers. Israel is inviting settlers to Gaza. Did you know that? So before, we only had talks about, you know, some of these settler movements talking about, you know, we want to settle in Gaza and we need to build, and we want a sea view over the bodies of the Palestinian children and innocent people killed. But now what? Now the IDF, who are trying to hide, always trying to hide their crimes and spew venom and propaganda, they're confirming that they are inviting these depraved squatters to Gaza. Why are they inviting them? It's because they're side by side with them. They're hand in hand. There is no difference between the IDF and the most radical of radicals inside of this genocide state. They're all the same. So we've had this report as well, again, confirming. Satellite images revealed, firstly, the IDF built large bases in the center of the Gaza Strip and destroyed hundreds of buildings. That's not new, probably new to some of the ignorant Israeli population being brainwashed by this poison here. But this is, look at this, clear, massive bases. And we spoke about them establishing in the Netzarim line. But what's more interesting is this right here. Look at those. This is Daniela Weiss, the squatting witch, the main squatting witch that always calls for settlements in Gaza. And these are some of the grand thieves of lands in the West Bank. They're trying to steal now lands in Gaza. And this is a genocide officer. This here is a genocide officer showing them around in Gaza. You know, we still have the bodies of people in the streets, and they're inviting the squatting masters to Gaza to show them, look, we killed so many people for you. Now it's time for you to come and build your homes on top of them. Mind you, you might find a body under your house at one point, but I hope that doesn't bother you. And of course, they wouldn't mind, you know, it's fine, no problem from their perspective. They've already done that in other locations too. So anyone trying to differentiate between the Israel as a state, the Israeli army, the squatters, you're delusional. They're all the same. They work hand in hand, and they only try and fool people and fool you. As a matter of fact, the ex-IDF chief is now saying that IDF is implementing an ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. Where are all of the propagandists sitting there denying and questioning genocide from their sofas? Where are you? Bogi Ya'alon, Moshe Ya'alon, he is confirming that Israel is implementing a campaign of ethnic cleansing inside of Gaza. What how many more people from Israel do you need? This is the ex-IDF chief. The ex-IDF chief saying that we are having a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And Netanyahu's ex-defense chief, he was under Netanyahu. Netanyahu's ex-defense chief, Ya'alon, warns Israel on path of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But during his statement, he also said, well, we're already implementing an ethnic campaign in the north, an ethnic cleansing campaign in the north. What's happening in the north clearly shows that. We're forcibly forcing people out. Look at what's happening in Jabalia. What more do you want than that? Former Defense Minister and ex-IDF Chief Staff Moshe Ya'alon said on Saturday that Israel's leadership, driven by far-right elements who seek to resettle in Gaza, was taking the country down the path of ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip, and specified that the IDF was already cleansing, here you go, parts of Gaza of Arabs, no Palestinians, Arabs. While warning that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government was leading the nation to destruction. The path we are being dragged down is one of occupation, annexation, and ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip, the prominent government critic told the Democrat TV. Transfer, call it what you want, and Jewish settlements. Who is that? Ya'alon, the ex-IDF chief. Is any propagandist listening? If any propagandist is listening, then I would like you to post that next time you speak. That the ex-IDF chief saying there's ethnic cleansing in Gaza. For the deniers, right? So more and more people are speaking up, even from the military establishment, against this campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing that is happening in Gaza. It's undeniable. And the state, it's not stopping like in Gaza or anything. The state is on a mission of complete implementation of fascism. Fascism, I mean, worse than Nazism. The worst dystopian state you can ever imagine. That's what's happening in Israel. How? Now the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is saying that we need to ban the call for prayer. He needs to ban the call for prayer inside of occupied territories. He instructs the police, prevent mosques from using loudspeakers to broadcast a call to prayer. The call of the prayer was in Palestine ever since there were Muslims in Palestine for over 1,400 years. When there were still Jews in some points, in some locations, and Christians, of course, in Palestine. But now, 1,400 years later, this foreigner wants to come and dictate how Muslims call for prayer in their own land. In their own land. That's inside of the Palestinian occupied territories. That's inside of Israeli territories. Inside of the heart of the genocide. Full-blown fascism, dystopia, Orwellian state. That's what they're doing. And they're still being supported by countries that call themselves enlightened democracies. That's the first part in relation to Gaza, Lebanon, Palestine, and the genocide. And they're also linked with what's happening in Syria. So for the past couple of days, we've been talking about the developments in Syria with armed groups storming into locations that are very important when it comes to Syria. And now we have a call, or really an attempt coming from Iran primarily to try and de-escalate. And this de-escalation attempt started from Syria. Yesterday, Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, he was in Syria. He was talking with the Syrian leadership about what's happening in Aleppo and in other parts too. Now some of the armed opposition are marching through Hama as well. And clearly we're looking at a big campaign here. And now he is in Turkey. And now Turkey is calling for de-escalation. Several days back, Turkey was saying, oh no, this is just a limited campaign. They were showing more of an understanding when it comes to this operation coming from the armed opposition groups. Because in Syria, you have opposition groups that are not armed. And not all of the opposition is united. That's because, some people like to label the whole side as something and the other side as something. That's not true. Coming from people who support the government, from people who oppose the government. Some people in the opposition did not choose the violent path, by the way, and some of them do not necessarily agree with all of the actions being taken by these armed groups. But these armed groups are there, and they are present heavily, and they are backed. And Turkey was showing an understanding to these armed groups when it comes to this operation, saying it's a limited operation, and it's a response. It's a response to the attacks that are being conducted jointly by the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force, or what is labeled as the Syrian-Russian Air Force in Syria. But now it seems like the tone has changed after Abbas Araghchi visited Turkey. Now, mind you, Russia already told them, you're breaching the agreements that we had with you, with the Syrians, and with other countries too. But Araghchi probably told them something. And I'll get to what he might have told them in a sec. But we had this report in Daily Sabah in Turkey saying Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan discussed anti-regime groups' offensive in Syria and the Palestine-Israel conflict in a meeting in the capital Ankara on Monday with his Iranian counterpart Araghchi. And they had a news conference where they repeatedly warned all parties of the conflict, meaning the pro-government and the anti-government, to avoid escalation of tensions. He noted that the problems have not been resolved for the past 13 years since the start of the unrest in Syria, which led to the current situation. And he also added that it would be false to explain away the developments due to foreign intervention, although most of the support is coming from Turkey. He underlined that Turkey always supported the territorial integrity in Syria as well. And then they added that Turkey and Iran are seeing eye to eye when it comes to cooperation against terrorism. And Ankara would not allow terrorist groups to exploit instability in Syria. Fidan stated that they had measures in place against possible problems that may affect Turkey. And of course, yesterday, Araghchi was in Damascus where he met Bashar al-Assad. And he told him, Tehran supports you firmly. And after this attack that is coming from the armed Syrian opposition. So what's the reason for this change when it comes to Turkey? We could have potentially had, a bit of a warning coming from Iran. About what? Well, Iran can use leverage against Turkey when it comes to some of the Kurdish movements in Syria. We already saw coordination between the Syrian government and the Kurdish movements that went to Aleppo. And Iran can have similar intervention. But the intervention that can come from Iran with the Kurdish movements, although Iran doesn't want that, by the way, because Iran already has problems with the Kurdish movements themselves, they can cause much more headache to Turkey. They can cause much more headache to Turkey internally, not just inside of Syria, with the areas that some of the armed opposition groups are controlling. They can give them drones. Not the most advanced or whatever, but they can give them drones. If the Kurdish movements obtain drones from Iran, then we would have something much more powerful inside of Russian territories. That's something very important. And this comes simultaneously with a recent report coming from Reuters, actually, alongside some sources in Syria confirmed that as well, based on some journalists, saying that the UAE and the United States discussed lifting Assad sanctions in exchange for break with Iran. So it is about something, and that warning came before, if I'm not mistaken. Let's read through it. The US and the United Arab Emirates discussed with each other the possibility of lifting sanctions on Bashar al-Assad if he peels away himself away from Iran, cuts off weapons route to Lebanon's Hezbollah. So they're tied. The operation and this offer, right? Carrot and stick. 5 people familiar with the matter said, the conversations intensified in recent months, the sources said, driven by the possible expiry on December 20th, sweeping US sanctions on Syria, and by Israel's campaign against Tehran's regional network, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Iranian assets in Syria. Look at all of that. Firstly, the terrorist administration in the United States is illegally imposing sanctions on Syria, like it does very arrogantly against other countries too. And now they're saying, you don't want us to extend this embargo, sanctions, distance yourself from Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. Who does that serve? Why is the United States doing this? For the sake of Israel, right? Who does it serve? The discussions took place before anti-Assad rebels swept into Aleppo last week in their biggest offensive in Syria for years. So we warned you. You refused, clearly. The Assad government refused to submit. And then they told them, well, here you go, a new campaign. You can deal with that now. According to the sources, the new rebel advance is a signal of precisely the sort of weakness Assad's alliance with Iran and that the Emirati and US initiative aims to exploit. But if Assad embraces Iranian help for counteroffensive, that could also complicate efforts to drive a wedge between them, the sources said. Typical US administration behavior. They act like a massive cartel, a massive mafia, mass terror, going threatening countries. If you don't listen to us and do what we want you to do, then you will face sanctions. We will choke you and your population. Because sanctions, they're not just against the regime, right? What they call the regime. Sanctions are against the whole state. Everyone suffers from sanctions. Let that be very clear. Some people don't understand that. They'll tell you sanctions against the country. These sanctions are against all of the people of Syria. And some of these people oppose the government. So don't act like you care about the people of Syria. But clearly the Syrian government is not going to submit to the United States. They already have the support. Some people in Syria back them. Some people oppose them. You have Russia backing them, Iran backing them too. So it's not like they are in a weak position. They were in a much weaker position before the Russian intervention. Yet, even with that, they did not submit to the United States demands, because this was not the first time that the United States proposes this to the Syrian government. They proposed that to the government in Syria when the armed opposition was taking away massive territories, and they were close to Damascus too. But they did not agree. This needs to be clear. They did not agree. If they had agreed, then the situation would have been different. And the beginning of the operation following this proposal from the US clearly shows who's behind this operation and for the sake of who this operation is being implemented. Because like I said, when you talk about sanctions, against Syria, well, they are affecting the people who you claim to be supporting. It's not as if not everyone in Syria is pro-government, are they? So you're affecting them too. But of course, they have armed groups that do as they're told. And because they do as they're told, they began this campaign several days back because the government in Syria rejected the proposals coming from the US and, according to the report, the UAE, to cut ties with Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. But the funny thing is, by the way, the UAE, after they started to have these attacks from the armed groups, they showed solidarity with the government, indicating that the UAE might have been outside of the picture when it comes to the armed groups' operation, the deterrence of aggression. They were clearly outside of the picture. Those who were in the picture, of course, was the American administration and Israel. And that's happening when? That's happening with warnings coming from Israel, the main party benefiting from what's happening. What are they saying? They're saying the IDF is warning Tehran in the shadow of the rebel attack in Syria. We will prevent Iranian weapons from reaching. And this warning stretched to Syria. IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Daniel Hagari, if you don't know Hagari, here he is, the calendar man. The calendar man, you remember him. IDF spokesperson Hagari was interviewed this afternoon by Sky News and issued a warning to Iran against the background of developments in Syria. The Iranian regime is sending reinforcements to Syria. We are monitoring the situation there and confirm that Israel will act according to the appropriate position. Iranian weapons are prevented from reaching Syria. By who? By you? Who do you think you are? Plus, why are you worried about Iran sending reinforcements and you're not worried about this armed opposition controlling areas of Syria? What does that tell you? And the fact that we're having this operation after the warning that came from the United States alongside the UAE to offer the Syrian government to stop supporting them and we might lift the sanctions. And now we have Israel also threatening as well.